I'm Rachel, 45 years old, and this is my story, one that almost tore my life apart. It's strange how things can spiral out of control when you least expect it, and how someone you trust can suddenly become someone who feels like a complete stranger. It all started so innocently. Really, my husband Michael and I had been married for 8 years. We had a beautiful home, great careers, and the most lovable golden retriever, Max, who was like a-killed to us, but like all relationships, ours hit a rough patch. We were still together, but emotionally, we had drifted apart. Michael was working late hours, and I often felt neglected, unnoticed, like I was disappearing in my own home. I didn't realize how vulnerable I was until JN came into the picture. John was my husband's best friend and a frequent guest at our house. He had been part of our lives for years. He and Michael played basketball together, and the three of us would often share dinners talking about everything from life to sports to work. But as time went on, John and I started to connect in a way that felt different. It wasn't intentional, at least. Not at first. We joke around, laugh a little too hard at each other's jokes, and slowly I began to look forward to the moments when John would come over, those innocent conversations between us started to become more personal. We'd talk about our frustrations in life, and before I knew it, I found myself sharing things with JN that I hadn't even told Michael. I'll admit I was flattered by the attention John noticed. The little things, my new hairstyle, the way I styled my clothes, things that Michael had stopped noticing long ago. It felt nice to be seen again, to feel important. But I never thought it would go beyond that. At least, that's what I told myself. Then one evening, things took a turn. It was a typical Friday night. Michael had to stay late at work again, and John came over to help me with some repairs around the house. Max was excited as always, jumping around, wagging his tail, and barking at John's arrival. Everything seemed normal, but there was a different energy between Ye and me that night. It was in the way he smiled, the way his hand brushed against mine when he handed me a tool. We laughed as we fixed a broken cabinet in the kitchen, but there was a tension growing between us. It was subtle at first, but it was there after the repairs were done. We sat on the couch with Max between us, watching some random show on TV. The air felt thick, like something was bound to happen, but neither of us was willing to make the first move, and then it happened. I don't even know how to explain it. One moment. We were sitting there, and the next, John reached over and placed his hand on mine. It wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't friendly either. It was something else, something more. I should have pulled away. I should have gotten up and told him to leave, but I didn't. Instead, I let it happen. The feeling of his touch sent a shiver down my spine, and for a split second, I didn't care about the consequences. It was like my mind shut down, and all I could feel was the warmth of his hand on mine. Max, lying at our feet, shifted slightly, but stayed still as if sensing something was wrong. But then reality came crashing down. I heard the front door unlock. My heart skipped a beat as Michael walked in, completely unaware of what he had just interrupted. John quickly pulled his hand away, and I jumped up from the couch, my face flushed with guilt. It all happened so fast, yet the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Hey, I'm home, Michael said casually, setting his keys on the table. What's going on? Nothing, I blurted out, my voice a little too high-pitched. We were just watching TV. John stood up too clearly, just as uncomfortable as I was. Yeah, I was just about to head out, he said, avoiding Michael's eyes. Michael didn't seem to notice the awkwardness between us, or maybe he was just too tired to care. He walked over to Max and started petting him, and for a moment I thought we were in the clear. Maybe Michael hadn't noticed anything. Maybe this could all just blow over and we'd never have to speak of it again. But deep down I knew that wasn't the case. Something had shifted between John and me, something that couldn't be undone. We hadn't crossed the line physically, but emotionally. We were already standing on the edge, and I was terrified of what would happen next. As John left that night, he gave me a look that told me he was feeling the same way I was. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, and that was the moment I realized I was in too deep. The days following that night were a blur of confusion and guilt. Couldn't stop thinking about John. His touch, his presence, the way he made me feel noticed. But every time I thought of him, I was immediately hit with a wave of guilt. Michael hadn't done anything wrong. He was a good husband, distracted and tired, yes, but he didn't deserve what was happening behind his back. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that it was just a moment of weakness. Nothing more, but as much as he wanted to bury it. JN was always there. He would text me random things, like asking how I was doing or if Max had been behaving. It wasn't overly flirtatious, but the subtext was clear. He hadn't forgotten that night either. I knew I should have ignored him, but I didn't. The truth is I enjoyed the attention, and that realization made me hate myself even more. Every time I replied, I felt like I was playing with fire, but I couldn't stop. Things came to Ed one evening when Michael decided to invite JN over for dinner. He said it had been a while since the three of us had spent time together, and I couldn't exactly argue without raising suspicions. So I put on a smile and pretended like everything was normal. But inside, I was a wreck. The dinner was awkward. At least, for me, Michael and John were their usual selves, laughing, talking about sports and sharing stories about work. But I couldn't focus. Every time John looked at me, I felt like he could see right through me. And every time Michael smiled at me, I felt like the worst person in the world. After dinner, we moved to the living room, Max trailing behind us, as always. John sat down on the couch, and I hesitated for a moment before sitting next to him, careful to keep a noticeable distance between us. Michael was in the kitchen cleaning up, completely oblivious to the tension between John and me. And then, in a moment that I'll never forget, Max jumped up onto the couch right between John and me, just like he had the night before. He was wagging his tail, oblivious to the emotional storm brewing in the room. John chuckled and reached over top at him, and for a split second his hand brushed against mine again. It was like déjà vu, but this time I pulled away, instantly my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't do this anymore. I stood up abruptly, startling both JN and Max. I'm going to help. Michael in the kitchen, I said, my voice shaky. I needed to get out of there. The walls were closing in, and I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of my own guilt. John didn't say anything, he just nodded, his expression unreadable in the kitchen. I found Michael drying dishes, humming softly to himself. He looked so content, so blissfully unaware of the emotional disaster unfolding behind his back. I watched him for a moment, and the guilt hit me like a freight train. This was wrong, everything about this was wrong. Hey, can I talk to you? Asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael turned to me, his smile fading when he saw the look on my face. What's wrong? I hesitated, my mind racing. Should I tell him the truth? Should I confess everything and risk losing him forever? But as I stood there, staring into his concerned eyes, I realized that I couldn't not like this. The truth would destroy him, and I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to tear our lives apart. Nothing, I lied. Forcing a smile, I've been feeling a little off lately. Work's been stressful. Michael relaxed, clearly relieved. You know, you can talk to me about anything, right? He said, pulling me into a hug. I'm here for you. His embrace felt like a lifeline, pulling me back from the edge, and in that moment, I made a decision. I was going to end whatever was happening with John. I couldn't keep walking this dangerous line, risking everything for something that wasn't worth it. But fate had other plans. The next day, I texted John, telling him we needed to talk. I wanted to be clear, this needed to stop. I wasn't going to risk my marriage for a fleeting attraction, no matter how strong it felt. He agreed to meet up, but instead of suggesting a public place, he asked if he could come over when Michael wasn't home. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When John arrived, Max greeted him excitedly. As usual, oblivious to the tension in the air, I led John into the living room, determined to have a serious conversation. I needed to set boundaries. I needed to end this before it went any further. But John had other ideas. As soon as we sat down, he leaned in closer than I expected, his eyes locked on mine. Rachel, I can't stop thinking about you. He confessed, his voice low and intense. My heart raced, but I shook my head. John, this is wrong. We can't do this. I love Michael. I know, he said, his hand reaching for mine again, but I can't help how I feel. I pulled my hand away, standing up to put some distance between us. This has to stop. We can't keep doing this. JN stood up too, frustration clear on his face. Rachel, you feel it too. I know you do. Before I could respond, The sound of the front door unlocking sent a wave of panic through me. Michael was home early. I hadn't expected him for another hour. John froze, his eyes wide with shock. I could hear Max barking excitedly from the hallway as Michael stepped inside. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized the situation we were in. There was no way to explain this without it looking bad. Michael walked into the living room, his face lighting up when he saw me until he noticed John. His expression shifted immediately, confusion and suspicion clouding his features. He looked from me to JN and back to me again, his brow furrowing. What's going on?" Michael asked, his voice cautious but sharp. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The guilt was overwhelming, and I knew there was no way to explain this without it sounding like exactly what it was: a betrayal. John, sensing the tension, quickly spoke up. "I was just leaving," he said, his voice too casual. "I came by to check on Max." Michael's eyes narrowed as he looked between us, clearly not buying the excuse. Why would you need to check on Max when Rachel's home? The room was silent, and at that moment I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't undo what had been set in motion. I hope you all like this story. For more stories, kindly comments and subscribe my channel and press bell icon. Love you all.